Hello and welcome to the FATBOSS guide to Imperator Mar'gok in Highmaul, and in this video we're going to show you how to kill the boss on both normal and heroic difficulty, as the tactics apply to both versions of the boss.
Now this fight is a very long fight. It has got 4 phases and 2 intermission phases. However, luckily for us, the mechanics in each one of the non-intermission phases remain relatively the same. However, there's one new thing per phase per mechanic that you need to deal with. So it just changes a tiny bit throughout each phase.
Now for this encounter you do need to bring 2 tanks, and a 10-man bring 2 healers, and a 30-man bring 5 healers, and you want to make sure it of melee and range DPS.
So let's kick straight into it and talk about the boss's abilities, and the first of which is something for the tanks to deal with, which is Accelerated Assault. Now this is an ability that remains unchanged throughout the entire fight. It won't change from phase to phase to phase, however it will remain through each of the phases. What it does is that each time the boss melee hits, he gains an 8% attack speed bonus. However, this will reset each time he switches target, so all you need to do in order to make it so it doesn't go to extortionate amounts is just taunt, roughly around 10 stacks. Very simple.
Another thing for your tanks to worry about is a debuff called Mark of Chaos. Now after a cast, once this is applied to your tanks, that tank then has 8 seconds to run as far away from the raid as possible, because once it does expire, you'll do a huge amount of damage to anyone within 35 yards of you. So it's very simple, get the debuff, get the hell out of the raid, and make sure the other tank taunts so the boss doesn't follow you. Now an ability for your raid to worry about is something called Destructive Resonance, which is pretty much globally known as mines. Now when the boss casts this, it will summon a circle under a ranged player's feet that after a short time will then become active. If you stand inside the circle when it is active, you will trigger it and it will deal damage to the entire raid. However, the player that triggered it will take even more damage and will likely one-hit them. If they don't get one hit and they somehow survive, they'll have a debuff that increases the amount of damage they take from Arcane, which is pretty much every ability in the entire fight, and you'll also be stunned. Basically, when these mines spawn, move out of them and do not get hit by them.
Otherwise, everyone will laugh at you behind your back and everyone will hate you. Another very fancy mechanic that the boss does is something called Force Nova. He will release a wave of energy that grows across the entire room, and you will take damage when this hits you. Now, the damage isn't really high, however, it ticks very quickly. However, if you do run through it, you won't be taking as many ticks because you won't be at the edge of it for very long. So when it does come in, run through it. It just minimizes the amount of damage you take. Yeah, you do have to move. Oh no, I can't cast for as much, but you're not dead. Being dead is not good. Now this will also knock back anyone in melee, so make sure that you aren't knocked back into any mines. Oh god, as a melee I have been knocked back into many mines like this, and it's so stupid, so just make sure that you're just on the other side of the boss. Now one of the most important and probably most complicated mechanics in the entire fight is something called Arcane Wrath, and we're going to explain it very simply. Now this is just a debuff that is applied to one random player and it lasts for 4 seconds. When it expires, it deals damage and then will jump to the closest player within 200 yards. Each time it does jump, the damage that it will do at the end of the duration of the debuff is increased by 25%, however the range it can jump is decreased by 50%. So it starts at 200, then goes down to 100 yards, then goes to 50, then 25, then 12, and then 6, and then, you know, that's pretty much it. Now if there is no target in range for this debuff to jump to, it will just disappear. It will still do the damage at the end of it, but then it won't jump to anyone else because there's nobody in range, and that's pretty much what you want to do.
So you want to bounce the debuff around until the range of it gets low enough for a player to run away with it so it does finally disappear. So the way that we did it is that we assigned 2 hunters to pretty much bounce the debuff throughout the entire fight. The players who got the initial wrath on them would run over to the hunters and deposit on top of them, so that player has 4 seconds to react and run over to the hunters. The hunters then bounce it between each other for around 4 or 5 stacks, and then one of the hunters that has the debuff would then run away and the debuff would drop.
Now if the hunter did happen to leave the range of the healers and was going to die, you can deterrence right at the end of it and that'll completely stop all damage. However, the wrath comes in so often that you can't deterrence every single one, so only do it if you are out of range of your healers or the stack is ridiculously high and is most likely going to one-shot you, because of course the more times it jumps the more damage it deals.
Now if you don't have hunters in your raid for whatever reason, you can use other players to do this. That's absolutely fine. It just so happens that, you know, hunters are mobile as shit and they can do a lot of damage on the move, so it's not a massive DPS loss for them to do it.
Now one last thing that the boss will do in every single one of his phases is spawn an ad called an Arcane Aberration. Now this ad just does constant ticking AoE damage. It isn't a cast, you can't like interrupt it in any way, it's just an aura that it does on the whole raid, dealing light ticking damage every second. And really, you just want to destroy this as soon as you possibly can. The boss will spawn it in front of him. If you have a Death Knight, you can grip it straight underneath melee, then everyone can cleave off of it and completely annihilate it.
Now they're all the mechanics that you'll see in this phase, so In terms of strategy, what you need to do is just have the boss positioned in the middle of the room and you have the ranged all stacked up on one single location on the outside around the circle. Now every time a mine spawns, the entire raid moves as one group to the left. However, you have 2 players stood out just to deal with the RAF. And of course, like we said, we were using the hunters. Like this, there's no way the RAF will accidentally bounce back into the raid, and if it does, the person who does get the RAF can just move back out to the hunter.
It's also really beneficial to have the range all stacked up in one point because of the amount of AoE damage going out because of the Force Nova and the ad doing ticking damage. Like, you can just throw a bunch of effects on the floor and it's very, very easy. Also, you know where the mines are going to be, so melee won't accidentally be knocked back into them because the mines are always in the same place. So it just makes everything a lot cleaner.
Now, once the boss does hit 85%, he'll go into phase 2. And this is where the first set of changes come into play. Now the Mark of Chaos, the tank debuff that makes you explode, works exactly the same way. You still have 8 seconds to move away from everyone in the raid. However, when it's initially applied to you, you'll be immediately teleported to a random location in the room. However, 99% of the time this just appears to be on top of ranged DPS. So you would be teleported onto the rest of the raid, just move away, make sure you give the raid plenty of distance.
Now the mines in this phase have one additional new thing about them, is that they grow over 30 seconds to twice their original size. So that means that when you do move from them, you have to move slightly further because they'll grow and grow and grow. And if it does touch anyone, kaboom, everyone laughs at you. So make sure you do just move slightly more and don't go back into them.
Now Force Nova in this phase is far more deadly than it was in the previous, because now it will also push you back as you go through it, which means you're going to take more damage because you'll be in it for a longer period of time, which puts far more strain on your healers. Every time that we do go through this Force Nova, we try to use Aspect to the Fox. If you have that at your disposal, then try and use it. But the most important thing with this Force Nova is that you don't stand still. If you stand still, you'll be pushed with it and eventually you'll die. So make sure that you do run through it and you don't stop to cast.
Now Arcane Wrath's new additional ability, you could call it, is that when you are marked with the debuff, you will get a little ring around you, a nice little circle around you. If you try and leave the circle, you'll be teleported straight back into the middle of it. So really, it's like a tiny little jail cell for you to play with. Now this just means that you can't move as much because you are stuck in this little 10-yard radius circle, so getting it out of the group can be a little bit more of an issue. However, you just deal with it in exactly the same way. Just make sure your 2 hunters go and pick it up and they just slowly rotate it between standing at the edge of their circle so they can try and get it out of the raid. You should still be able to drop it about 4 or 5 stacks, and at that point one hunter just fucks off, the other guy stands in his little circle, waits for it to drop and joins the raid again. It's very, very simple.
Now the ad in this phase still does ticking damage to the raid, however when it dies, it will knock everyone back. So it's incredibly important that melee, you watch where you're positioned when this ad dies so you don't get knocked back into the mines that have already spawned, because of course they're twice the size, which means it's a lot easier for you to get knocked into them. So you just repeat the tactic from phase 1, dealing with the mechanics slightly differently until eventually you hit the 55% health mark, and this is when he'll go into his first intermission phase.
Now the intermission phase lasts for 1 minute, and during this time the boss would no longer do any of his abilities anymore, and he's also immune to damage, so you can't keep whoring on the boss. It's time to deal with some other things, which of course are the ads.
So in this phase there's a couple of different types of ads that spawn, and to start off we'll talk about the volatile anomalies. Now these ads always spawn directly underneath the boss in this cloudy fart thing that he has underneath him, and they spawn in waves of 3, and there's 6 waves in total. Now these ads are exactly the same as the ads that you saw on Korag. When they die they explode and deal damage to the raid. However, there isn't a suppression field that you can just put them inside. This damage you need to take. And because there is so many of them, and you do have only a minute or so to kill the majority of them, the raid's going to be taking a lot of AoE damage, which forces your raid to stack up. You want to try and stagger these so they die as slowly as possible without it taking too long and you having all of them up as soon as you enter the next phase. So only assign a handful of DPS to kill these, and let your healers know when they are going to die so they can work out when they're going to use their cooldowns.
Now being stacked up as a range group is all nice and well because you get to be all healed up and lovely. However, there's some horrible war mages at the back are here to be bastards. What they'll do is they'll fixate on a random player for 15 seconds and spam Nether Blast into them. Now this will deal high damage to that target, plus anyone that is within 5 yards of that target, so it's doing splash damage. If you're fixated and you're sticking in the range group all happy-go-lucky, or you're actually killing everyone. If you get the fixate, move out because otherwise you're just going to completely destroy everyone.
Now if you're fixated as melee, it's important that all the other melee recognize this. You might even want to assign a point next to one of the mobs that you're killing that says, right, if you're fixated as a melee, you got to stand here, everyone else stand on the opposite side, because you can still attack the mob, and everyone does need to be able to attack the mob, because of course you only have a minute in this phase, and ideally you need to kill everything before you do enter the next phase. So make sure if a melee is fixated that none of the other melee are stood near him, but make sure you're close enough to the mob to still do damage to it.
Now these war mages also have one more ability, which is a debuff called Slow. This will reduce your movement speed, attack speed, and spellcasting speed by 50% for 45 seconds. This is dispellable, and also you can dispel it with stuff like Hand of Freedom and stuff like that, so it's very important that you do, because of course this whole phase is a pretty tight DPS timer. Now the reason that you don't just tank the little lads right on top of the war mages, making it so you can generally cleave down and have more DPS uptime, is because these war mages do have an aura around them that just makes everything deal a hell of a lot more damage. Just take our word on it, don't tank the little lads next to the war mages. Bad things happen, just keep your raids separated.
So for the DPS in this phase, just assign a few of them to go on the anomalies, while all the rest of them just focus down one of the war mages and then the other war mage, and by the time both those war mages are dead, the phase should have ended and you should be going back on the boss. Keep in mind though, a couple of anomalies do spawn just before the phase finishes, and they'll probably not die before the phase starts. So once you do reach this phase, try and kill them off quickly, but make sure you keep an eye on your raid's health, because you don't want to instantly blow these up with your raid on 20 or 30% health.
So once you finish that intermission phase, phase 3 will start. Now at the beginning of this, we switch around the location of our ranged and our melee. So we have the ranged right in the middle of the room, in that little inner circle, and we have the melee going around the outside edge. Now this is because of the Mark of Chaos, the tank debuff. This no longer teleports you to a random location, it roots you. So you can't move. You can't run away 35 yards, everyone has to run 35 yards away from you. The way we deal with this is that we just tank the boss in one corner, and then as soon as the ability went out, the other tank taunted, dragged the boss to the other corner with all the melee following, and then they were out of range. We also popped things like Aspect of the Fox and Stampeding Roar, so all of the range could move and continue doing damage and healing just to keep everything going. But do keep in mind that the range don't have to move as much because they're already some distance away from the tank.
Now the mines in this phase no longer grow, thankfully, however they do last twice as long, which means there's going to be far more of them up, and because you are in the middle of the room and you don't have that much room to move out, because otherwise you'll get too close to the tanks and everything, it's even more important now that you do remain stacked, so you maximize room with these mines.
Now the Force Nova no longer pushes you away, however, it will still knock back melee when it spawns. It always does that throughout the entire fight. However, this Force Nova will now pulse 2 more times at 8-second intervals after the initial pulse, so every single Force pulse, 2 more come afterwards, and this really hurts. It's a horrible thing, so make sure that you continue with the normal strat of running through it in order to minimize damage, and you also might need to use a healing cooldown, especially with the ad ticking on you and all that horrible stuff. Do keep in mind that you might drop quite low.
So if you did manage to save a cooldown from the previous transition, it would be a good idea to use it here, just to keep on top of things.
Now the Arcane Wrath no longer applies a little circle around you, so you'll feel free to run about like a nutcase if you want to. However, the jump range now is only reduced by 25% each time it jumps, rather than 50. Meaning that if you want to get it to a low enough range that it won't go onto another player when you want to drop it, you're going to need to make it jump more and more times, which means the damage is going to go up higher and higher. Normally you can drop it around 6 or 7 stacks if you are using 2 hunters, because what they can do is disengage, run as far as they can, and then deterrence, because of course that'll minimize all the damage. However, if you don't have that option, it will just need to probably go up to maybe even 8, maybe even 9 stacks, which is getting close to 1-hit territory, so just be careful that this is going to take longer to get to a lower circle. You've literally just got to heal it up.
And the ad that spawns in this phase no longer knocks back, which is great. However, it does have 75% extra health, which means it's going to be doing the ticking damage for longer. So it's even more important now, especially with all the Force Nova damage going out on the raid, that you do blow up this fucker as quick as you possibly can.
So of course for this phase, you just, as I said at the beginning, make sure you have switched around the range and the melee, and you just go from corner to corner to corner for every Mark of Chaos, and that you are dropping the Arcane Wrath, and just bear in mind that it does take longer to make it to a smaller radius. Once the boss does hit 25% HP, the next intermission phase will start. Now this intermission phase is the exact same, it still lasts for 1 minute, and you still have the little annoying volatile anomalies, and you still have the 2 war mages that are being really fucking annoying, but you also have one other ad in this phase, which is the Gorian Reaver.
He has an ability called Shockwave, which is just a frontal cone. Make sure you face it away from the raid. It does hit very hard. But he also has a tank debuff called Crush Armor that increases the amount of physical damage you take by 15%, and this ability stacks. So you need to tank swap. However, he has another ability called Kick to the Face that will punt your tank across the room, and it will drop all threat on that target. So you don't actually really need to taunt. I mean, well, you would anyway, but it makes tank swapping a lot easier.
Well, let's just say if you didn't tank swap, everyone would die. So at this point, when your tank does get kicked in the face, have the off tank make sure that they pick up the Gorian Reaver. This Gorian Reaver is so important to die that this phase is where you use Bloodlust. As soon as you can, nuke the shit out of it. As soon as the tank has picked it up, pop Bloodlust, pop everything that you've got, and destroy this guy as soon as you can, because you still only have 1 minute for this intermission phase. So after this guy dies, you need to go and kill the 2 War Mages while still dealing with the volatile anomalies. And really, with phase 4 coming up, you need to clear up as much as you possibly can before you go in. It is likely that something will be left over. Maybe one of the War Mages will be on about like 30% health. Finish him off and then go into phase 4.
Now in phase 4, the Mark of Chaos, the tank debuff, it still does the same thing. It will do a load of AoE damage to anyone within 35 yards. However, you're no longer rooted. But when you do explode, you'll also send out a load of orbs that travel and cross the entire room. If you do get hit by one of these orbs, you pretty much just get destroyed. Don't get hit by them and you'll be fine. The best way to deal with this is when you do get this debuff as a tank, run into the corner of the room and have your character against the wall. This way the majority of the orbs, or at least half the orbs, will just go through the walls and you won't ever see them ever again. And the raid will only have to do with a certain few, rather as if you was in the middle or something, then you'd have to deal with all of them.
Now the mines in this phase only last 1 minute again, which is absolutely fantastic. However, when they despawn or when they're detonated, they turn into 2 more mines. So basically, there are more mines. Don't get hit by mines, they're bad. The Force Nova in this phase no longer does 2 extra pulses. However, anyone hit by the Force Nova will deal damage to anyone within 4 yards of them. Now, because the Force Nova ticks so quickly, even if you run through it, you'll still pulse around yourselves 3 or 5 times, and pretty much if 2 people are stacked on top of each other and they're pulsing on top of each other, you are pretty much gonna die. So make sure that when this does come in, that you are all spread out, and then when you do run through it, no one is next to you. You can use things like Cloak of Shadows, Deterrence, Paladin Bubble, anything that can really immune damage, and that will make it so the Force Nova doesn't do damage to you, so therefore you aren't going to do any pulses around you.
And if you're a Mage or Druid, you can just flat out blink over the top of it and take no damage at all. Now the Arcane Wrath has changed. Thankfully, the distance reduction is no longer involved. It's gone back to 50% instead of 25%. However, the first time that Arcane Wrath jumps, a second player in the raid will also get the debuff, but it will no longer duplicate after this point, which means you need to do with 2 Arcane Wraths at the exact same time. Now at this point, the entire raid has to be spread because of the Force Nova, and because there's multiple mines spawning, it just becomes a complete and utter mess, and of course you have to avoid orbs. So every single player in the raid pretty much needs to be responsible for the Arcane Wrath at this point. However, it doesn't really change compared to how it was in phase 1. You still need to try and drop it at around 4 or 5 stacks because that's the 25 or 12-yard mark. So if you are on 4 or 5 stacks, just run away from people and try and drop the debuff.
Now the ad in this phase no longer has 75% increased HP, and of course it's still doing ticking damage to your head. With everything going on, it's even more important that you nuke this fucker. When he does die, he turns into 7 little ads. These ads don't do AoE, all they do is just wail on your tank, pick them up and lightly AoE them down, because of course you're minimizing damage done to your tank. And that's pretty much the phase, really. All you really need to do is move from everything and don't die. With healing cooldowns, really, if you do have any left over from the intermission phase, try and use them, especially around the Force Nova. The Force Nova normally causes the most issue, especially with people with melee, bless them, when there's about 6 people all trying to spread out. It's so adorable because they all just die. So do try and save things for stuff like that, and really, this phase is just a complete and utter mess. Just kill the boss, but make sure you kill that ad. It is so tempting to go, let's just kill the boss. He's only got 15% health.
Ad always takes priority.
Always kill the ad, unless the ad, of course, has more health than the boss, in which case finish off the boss. But you know what I mean? If the ad is up, just fucking kill the ad, for God's sake. And then, really, you shouldn't have too many issues.
So thank you very much for watching, guys. If this guide did help you get a kill, congratulations. Good luck in Mythic. But of course, drop us down a like first. Helps us out a lot. And if you would like to see any more of our Highmaul guides, then please do click on the annotations you see on your screen now, and there'll be some Mythic videos coming out very, very soon. Thanks for watching.
Thank you.